Hi, Sarahni. Here is my homework
Yay, good.
and the exam. I was relieved that it was only 2 questions for the exam.
Okay.
I can record Spanish. ¿Necesitas, Flavia? Flavia? Yeah, I can log in on my cell phone. Okay. Oh, I am in Asia Classic Institute. Oh, sorry. I need to log out.
Oh, I'm already going. It doesn't say cloud. Record to the cloud. Nah, okay. Okay, for the recording, welcome back. We are ACI course 2, class, thanks, Allie. Class 9. More discussion on proofs of emptiness. So let's gather our minds here as we usually do. Please bring your attention to your breath until you hear from me again. Now bring to mind that being who for you is a manifestation of ultimate love, ultimate compassion, ultimate wisdom. And see them appear there with you. They are gazing at you with their unconditional love for you, smiling at you with their holy great compassion, their wisdom radiating from them, that beautiful golden glow encompassing you in its light. And then we hear them say, bring to mind someone you know who's hurting in some way. Think about how much you would like to be able to help them. And how the worldly ways we try fall short. How wonderful it would be if we could also help them in some deep and ultimate way, a way through which they would go on to stop their distress forever. Grow that wish. Grow that wish into a longing. Then turn your mind back to that precious holy guide. We know that they know what we need to know, what we need to learn, what we need to do to become one who can help this other in this deep and ultimate way. And so we ask them, please teach us that. And they are so happy that we've asked. Of course, they agree. Our gratitude arises. We want to offer them something exquisite. And so we think of the perfect world they are teaching us how to create. We imagine we can hold it in our hands, and we offer it to them, following it with our promise to practice what they teach us, using our refuge prayer. Here is the great earth, filled with fragrant incense and covered with a blanket of flowers. The great mountain, 4 lands, wearing the jewel of the sun and the moon. In my mind, I make them the paradise of a Buddha and offer it all to you. By this deed, may every living being experience the pure world. Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kam Nirya Tayami. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the highest community. Through the merit that I do in sharing this class and the rest, may I reach Buddhahood for the sake of every living being. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the highest community. Through the merit that I do in sharing this class and the rest, may we reach Buddhahood for the sake of every living being. I go for refuge until I am enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the highest community. Through the merit that I do in sharing this class and the rest, may all beings reach their total awakening for the benefit of every other. Okay, last class, we learned just the names of those 5 classical reasonings to prove selflessness, also known as emptiness. The emptiness of one or many proof. The sliver of diamond proof. The denial that things which exist or things which do not exist could arise. Proof. The denial that things could arise through any of the 4 possibilities. Proof. And the reasoning of interdependence proof, also known as the king of reasonings. Then we only learned one of them. And that one, the emptiness of one or many proof. And the example that we use to learn that proof is consider the 3 knowledges. They don't exist really. Because they don't exist really as one thing. And neither do they exist really as multiple things or many things. They are, for example, like a reflection, like an image in a mirror. Apparently there, but coming from something else. So that was your meditation assignment, to work with that. And when you did anybody wonder how is it that those statements prove emptiness? Because if it was clear to you, then we don't need to do this class. But if in trying to sort out this emptiness of one or many proof, your conclusion was, how in the world does that prove emptiness? Then we do need to do this class. And I need to do this class again. So even if you guys get it, I need to do it for me. Apparently, Geshe Michael's class was equally confused, because although he said in the previous class we would learn those other 4 proofs, instead he went through showing how that proof of one or many, how we go about actually using it to prove what that first syllogism is saying. And he never then got to talking about the other proofs of emptiness, not until other courses. So we know those 3 knowledges: basic knowledge, meaning that the wisdom of selflessness that comes to a listener or self-made Buddha level practitioner when they experience ultimate reality and then interpret that experience as the selflessness, those levels of selflessness. Then path knowledge is the wisdom that a Mahayana practitioner who sees emptiness directly comes out with. They call it the wisdom of Bodhisattva. And then the knowledge of all things means omniscience, reaching that state of perceiving our own mind as aware of dependent origination and emptiness simultaneously, always, within which means we are perceiving directly every existing being and what they need to give up and take up, meaning, and their karmic seeds. So the proof wasn't about what those wisdoms really are. We're using them as the topic of consideration for our proof because they're a good example of something that is either one thing or many things. The 3 knowledges as a topic is one thing, but then the knowledges themselves are 3 things. So is the topic, the 3 knowledges, one or many? And then if we can sort out, well, my goodness, no one of them exists really, meaning in it, from it, independent of any other factor, especially independent of being perceived by somebody, experienced by somebody. If they don't exist in that way, then we can say they don't exist really. We're not saying they don't exist at all. Although if there was nobody who knew what they were, they didn't exist at all. So if we can establish that the three knowledges, either as that group or any one of them, does not exist really, then we don't have to bother proving that something that is multiple things doesn't exist really, because we've already shown that any one thing can't exist in it from it. So nothing made up of multiple one things can suddenly exist in it from it if all the things that make it up don't exist in them from them. And if we already had that in our minds, we'd read that syllogism, consider the three knowledges. They don't exist really, because they don't really exist as one thing, and they don't really exist as multiple things. They're just like an image in a mirror. But if that's not obvious, there needs to be a way that we can break it down and sort out, how do we prove beyond the shadow of a doubt that what we're asserting in our syllogism is in fact true? If we can show that to ourselves, then there's a whole host of ramifications that we've also shown to be true, that we don't have to go and then prove one by one. So to be able to sort this out, we want to, we need to know the method of how do we prove that our syllogism in fact is a proof. And the whole purpose of all of this is to show us how something could exist with this empty nature and be what we perceive. When we're first learning, we think, oh, if the thing's empty, it can't be what I'm perceiving. And then as we learn more and more, we recognize, oh yeah, because it's empty, it's nothing but what I see. It takes those two together. So if we accept that if something exists in our world, it must exist as either a singular thing or a plural thing, and there's no in between, we need to start there with ourselves or with somebody else. If we're having this proof discussion to prove to somebody else, it's always myself I'm talking to. Do I agree that any existing thing either needs to be one thing or multiple things? And there's no other alternative. So I think we can say yes, can't we? Then, if we can prove that any one thing cannot exist self-existently, as one thing, it's very easy to then prove that something could not exist self-existently as multiple things. For that reason, we've already seen multiple things are made up of one things. And if there's no such thing as a self-existent one thing, there can't be such a thing as a self-existent multiple thing. And it actually, this way of dividing all existing things makes it very easy to come to the conclusion that there's no existing thing that exists self-existently, which means all existing things don't exist self-existently. And we don't actually have to go through, every detail of every existing thing to check it for its self-existence or not. That would be impossible to do. So we use this tool. In Buddhist logic, we have these three elements. Our topic of consideration, our assertion about it, and our reason for our assertion about it. And then there are three more elements, which is there must be certain three relationships must hold between these three statements in order for us to establish that, in fact, our assertion about the topic of consideration is in fact true. So we need to understand these three relationships that need to hold. Those three relationships means that our reason must apply to our topic. I have it written out. I'll show you in a minute, but let me say it first. Relationship number one, does my reason and my topic of consideration, do they have a relationship? Is my reason true about the topic? If no, throw the whole syllogism out. If yes, we check the second relationship. The second relationship is we look at statement 3, our reason, and we say, if that reason is true, not whether it's true, just suppose it is true, then necessarily would that make the statement number 2 also true. And we just apply our reasoning to say yes or no. I'll show you. If the answer is no, we throw the whole syllogism out. If the answer is yes, if 3 were true, then 2 would have to be true. Then we go to our third relationship. It's called the negative necessity, which means if you negate your quality, does that necessarily negate your reason? Not in real life, but theoretically. If statement 2 were not true, what would happen to statement 3? If not 2 and not 3 hold, you have a syllogism that is a proof. Sorry, I said it backwards. If not 2, then not 3 holds, then you have a syllogism that is true, because it's the last relationship to check. So let me show you my share screen. Look how good your Tibetan is. Looks like you're reading English, right? Me too. Thank goodness we don't have this in Tibetan. So here's our syllogism. And here's some examples to check out how we're going to check our syllogism for truth or not. Where's my doodad? Here. Write this down so that you can look at it while you look at my examples, because I can't get it all on the screen at once. Oh, maybe I can. Yeah, there I can. Never mind. So let's do examples. Here's our syllogism. We're talking to some alien being who's fresh down to earth and is like, doesn't know anything much. And we say to that being, consider the sun. It is not blue because it's yellow. So in order to check this syllogism for proof that the sun is not blue, because maybe they are looking at the sun going, wow, that's a blue sun. No, our sun's not blue. Why do you say that? Because it's yellow. So let's check. First, we check the statement 3 and statement 1. Did they have a relationship? Is it true that yellow applies to the sun? Yeah. You look in the sky, sun looks yellow, kind of yellow, off-white. So we can go on to part check number 2, which is, if 3 were true, would it necessarily mean that statement 2 is true? If our reason were true, would it necessarily mean that what we say in our reason would also be true? So our reason is because it's yellow. If it's true that our sun is yellow, whether it really is or not, doesn't matter. If it were true that it's yellow, would it have to be true that the sun is not blue? Yeah, that holds, right? The sun has to be either yellow or green or red or blue or purple. It can't be both at the same time. So our positive necessity held. So then we check our third relationship called the negative necessity, where we negate our reason. No, we negate our assertion. And if we do, would that necessarily negate our reason? Not whether it's true in life, but just logically. So if we negate statement 2, the sun is not blue, our statement becomes the sun is not blue. What does that mean? The sun's blue. Not meaning it is in the sky, but if it were not blue, does that necessarily negate our reason? To negate the reason would be, then it's not yellow. If the sun is not blue, it means it is blue. And if it were blue, it necessarily could not be yellow. So this would be a logical proof to somebody who was confused about yellow or blue, that our sun is not blue because it's yellow. And it's absurd. Like, who would bother? Right? It's not about what we're proving. It's about the sequence that we use. So let's do some wrong ones. Consider the sun. It's not blue because it's green. So we check statement 3 and statement 1, the reason to the topic. Does the sun and being green have a relationship? No, because our sun's not green. So throw this one out. You don't even have to go any further. Let's try another one. Consider the sun. It's not blue because we can feel its heat. So check. Does statement 3, we can feel the heat, apply to the sun? Yes, we can feel the heat of the sun. So now let's go on. If it's true that we can feel the heat of the sun, if 3 then 2, it would necessarily be the case that it's not blue. Is there a relationship there? No. Right? The color has nothing to do with feeling it. So this syllogism did not pass the second rule, which is if 3 then 2. So we throw the whole thing out. I didn't do the fourth option, negate 2, and the other one gets negated, but it comes up later, I think. So you get the idea. The sequence of applying the relationships needs to be in this order. Does 3 and 1 relate to each other? Like in real life, in not real life, in our life. Then, if 3 were true, would that necessarily mean our assertion about the thing was true? If that says yes, then we check. Well, what if we negated our reason? Would that, if we negated our assertion, sorry, Flavia, if we negated our assertion, number 2, does that necessarily negate the reason? If we get a yes answer to all of those questions, we have a proof. And if the person doesn't agree at that point, then we still need to go back and find more common ground and build another syllogism to take us back to that one that was a proof, but we still didn't buy it. So let's look at, why did that do that? Or consider the 3 knowledges. They don't exist really, because they don't exist really as one thing, nor do they exist really as many things. I've got it cut off, but you know what it is. So with this first one, let's just check our 3. Does not existing really as one thing or as many things apply to the 3 knowledges? You know, we might say, I don't know. I can't answer that because I don't know what you mean by exist really or not. And if we say, I don't know, I can't agree to that, then we back off. And we need to go earlier in our thinking for our person who says, I don't know. Because if you don't have this consensus that 3 and 1 have a relationship, you can't go any further. So we might say, what does it mean to exist really as one thing, or really as multiple things? And so we could come up with another syllogism. consider the three knowledges, they don't exist really as one because they have parts. So now, if we check our three relationships, having parts, our reason, and the three knowledges, is there a relationship there? Do the three knowledges have parts? Yeah, the three different knowledges that we're talking about. So it fits 3 and 1, so we can go on. The next step, if it's true that they have parts, is it necessarily true that they don't exist really as one singular thing? Yeah, right? Can we say? We'll talk about it more in a minute. So now let's negate. Third relationship. If we negate our assertion, does it necessarily negate our reason? So if they don't not exist really as one, which means if they do really exist as one, does that necessarily mean that they don't have parts? Yes. Right? If they're really one single thing, they can't have parts. So this syllogism actually tells us that to exist really as one isn't possible, because all one things have parts. So then let's think that through. But let me explain first. So why is it that we're saying that if something exists in it, from it, as one whole thing, it would necessarily mean that it doesn't have parts? And how is it that we can say, well, that's ridiculous, because everything has to have parts? So for example, if we take this one whole thing, my hand, and it's a one whole thing that's made up of these different parts, but we're saying my hand is this whole. If my hand is really whole like that, sorry, I'm looking for a piece of paper, then if I covered part of the whole, like, would it be possible to cover part of a whole and still have some of it left to see? No, that you would, the instant it covered one, the whole thing would disappear because it's one whole thing. But that doesn't happen, does it? Look, 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 look. So regardless of these parts, there's the part of our perception of it. And in order to perceive a whole hand, our experience needs to go, oh, hand. Okay. We see indicators. And we just showed that there's no whole thing all there by itself. That the whole hand is actually coming from the mind of the perceiver, not from the hand itself. Because there's no whole hand here. There's only all this different information that makes up the thing that my mind says, oh, whole hand. Which, my dad had a friend who, this was his whole hand. And it worked very well. He could do anything with his hand that had only a pinky and a thumb. So for him, this is a whole hand. For me, I'd say, I only have part of a hand anymore. But then why do I still call it hand? If this is what defines hand, clearly there's something else going on that's making the whole thing. The whole, the singular, is not in the thing, which is what it means for a thing to not exist really as one thing. Because it's depending upon the experiencer to put on what they are experiencing for the thing to be what we are experiencing. And to do that, the experiencer receives information and processes that information into the whole that it sees. So the whole depends upon the parts and the part of the perceiving mind, which isn't a part of it at all. It's something different. So can that singular thing exist as a singular thing if it has parts? No. So something with parts cannot be said to exist really as one thing. Does it exist for me as one thing? Yes. But that's not in the thing. That's being laid on by my mind's projection of it. So to exist really would mean to be one thing that exists independent of its parts. And part of that is the perception of the one experiencing it by way of taking all those parts and putting it together into a whole. So let's look at it a little with a different perspective. Consider an existing thing which has parts. That existing thing exists in dependence upon its parts. Why do we say that? Because without parts, we can't perceive it. We can't see it. What was the definition of an existing thing? That which is perceived with a valid perception. So if we can't have a valid perception of the three knowledges without the parts of the three knowledges that our mind puts together into the three knowledges, then those three knowledges don't exist independent of their parts. So let's go back to the first syllogism. consider the three knowledges. They don't exist really, because they don't exist really as one thing, nor do they exist really as multiple things. And what we mean by existing really as one thing would be to exist as one thing independent of parts. Can we experience something that doesn't have parts? You know, our mind wants to say, yeah, I do it all the time, right? Whole apple, whole dinner, whole David. But in our experience of the apple, we don't see the whole apple. Like, here's our friend, the pen. I'm looking at the front of the pen. And wouldn't you say, no, I'm looking at the front of the pen? How can we both be looking at the front of the pen? I'm looking at the front, you're seeing the back. But you're over there. So you're seeing the front, I'm seeing the back. The pen's got to have parts, or we would both see the front. We would both see the whole pen at the same time, and do we? Can we, any one of us, see the whole pen at one time? No, I can only see this part, plus the touch that I have here that I can't see unless I look in the camera. So I think I'm perceiving a whole pen, but I'm really only getting half of it. And then even then, if I break it down moment to moment, my mind's going beep, 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 laying on pen, 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 pen. And without all those different little pieces, what would my pen get laid onto? The parts all need to be there. So any existing thing, whether we perceive it as a singular thing or multiple singular things, none of them can exist without their parts. And none of them can exist for me without me seeing the parts and then labeling those parts, oh, 4 pens. And then I think, oh, see, there's 4 pens here. This exists really as many pens. And I would be wrong, wouldn't I? They don't exist really as many pens because no one of them exists really as a pen. Does that mean there's no pens here at all? No. There is this one that my mind gets information and lays on blue and white pen that's like angular. And then pink and white. I don't know, this doesn't even look, anyway. Green and white round. Red and white round. I say they're all pens, but they're all different. We can't call them, they exist really as many, because there's 4 separate ones. Okay, so it all sounds like such semantics. The critical piece is learning this sequence of checking the relationships. When we say, consider such and such, it has this characteristic, or we should do that. And then we give our reason, because such and such. The habit would become, does my reason and my topic really have a relationship? Because if not, change your argument right there. If it does, check, if my reason's true, is it necessarily make my assertion true? If it does, gray. If it doesn't, change your argument. If it does, check the third. If I negate my assertion, does that necessarily negate my reason? Not in real life, but just suppose. And if that holds, then you can take your argument to the boss and say, consider me, I deserve a raise because, I don't know what your reason's going to be. But before you do that, check your reasoning to make sure that it's airtight before you offer it to the boss. And then if they say no, you say, well, wait, let's check out this reasoning. And I think I'll show you why it would be best for everybody involved that you give me that raise. Okay? And if you could get their attention long enough, and they'll have to go, oh, you're right. Wow. I want your kind of thinking in my company. Yes, I will give you a raise and a promotion. Because our thinking was so clear. Jamie thinks that's funny. I think that's the end of my, that's the end of my show and tell. So in using these syllogisms with ourselves or someone else, we're working at the level where a person already knows the different components of our argument, but they've never really put them together in such a way to show that this assertion is true. So for instance, in the sun example, look at our sun. It's not blue because it's yellow. If we're talking to somebody else, do you see the sun? Yes. Do you know what the sun is? Yes. I say it's not blue. In case you were thinking it was blue, I'm saying it's not blue. And the reason I say that is because it's yellow. And if we had to further explain that to the person, we would go through those three relationships. Right? In our world, is the sun yellow? Well, the person didn't even know it. So maybe it doesn't hold water for someone who doesn't know yellow or doesn't know blue. So we always want to be on common ground. And if we find that our statement is not resonating with the person, then we go back further. Right? We learned how to do that in course 13. Right. Wow. Okay, so what Geshe Michael was helping us to recognize is that if something really exists, then it has to exist independent of any other factor. That's what really means. In it, from it. Independent of any other factor. And we could have chosen independent of causes. We could have chosen independent of the person who's perceiving it. But a very basic way of looking at it is, can an existing thing exist independent of its parts? To exist really would mean it exists without its parts. You'd have a bicycle here and the parts of the bicycle over there. And it's ridiculous. So it may be then to actually use this, consider the three knowledges. They don't exist really as one thing or many things, because they don't exist. They don't exist really because they don't exist really as one thing or really as many things. That we need to further go through and check all the different ways that we might believe that things could exist really as one thing or really as multiple things. So we're going to dig in a little bit deeper. Let's take our break first of all, so I can regroup. I need to close this. And pause this. I think so. All right, so we want to look at this, consider the three knowledges. They don't exist really as one because they have parts, which we're using to be able to establish whether or not it's true that the three knowledges don't exist really as one thing, nor do they exist really as many things. So we said, I can't agree or disagree with 3 equals 1 until I know better what you mean by really. So consider the three knowledges. They don't exist really as one because they have parts. And then we could say, consider an existing thing which has parts. They exist in dependence upon their parts, because without parts, we can't experience them. We can't see them. So why can't we see something if it doesn't have parts? Why can't we see a whole thing? Because to come up with the whole thing, our sensory apparatus all pieces together little bits of information, and it's our mind that processes all of that into the whole. The object is not the whole thing. If it were, our eyeball would see the thing's fragrance. Our eyeball would hear its sound. Any given perception of the part would make the whole, and it doesn't. Our experience is that we see colors, shapes, we hear sounds, we hear, right? Each has its own unique aspect, part. of a given object. And then it's our mind that says, oh, angry yelling boss. Oh, pen. Oh, you can't perceive a whole thing without perceiving its parts. So the whole thing is not in it. It is not really one whole thing. Without our mind saying, oh, that whole. So in order to fully prove that the three knowledges don't exist really because they have parts, we would have to check out all existing things to see if all existing things have parts. And if we find that son of a gun they do, then we can say, and the three knowledges, they are an existing thing, so they must have parts too, which means they don't exist really. Seems convoluted, doesn't it? So if we're brand new in ACI, we would go through that chart of all existing things. We've all seen that chart. So I'm just going to describe it. Consider all existing things. You can divide them into existing things that are changing and existing things that are unchanging. In existing things that are changing, you have the categories of physical things, material things, changing things. You have the category of mental things. And you have that middle category of changing things that are not all mental, all physical. Geshe-Michael didn't talk about that category in this class. Just physical, mental. And then within the category of existing things that are unchanging, we have cessations, empty space, as in, the place our friend the pen is in, and emptiness, the absence of self-nature at whatever level we're talking about. So we can go through each of those different categories of existing things and check to see how is it that anything within this category depends on parts, or don't they? If we can find one thing that exists as a whole thing, independent of any parts, then we've wiped out our whole reasoning and we would need to start again. If we go through all these categories and find, son of a gun, I see that in all these different categories, anything within that category depends on parts in some way. We can come to the conclusion, well, there's no existing thing that can exist outside of this chart. It's all inclusive. And if everything inside that chart categories relies on parts, then so do the three knowledges. It seems like a lot of effort to decide whether or not consider the three knowledges, they don't exist really as one thing nor as multiple things. But until we do it, we can't really agree or disagree with that syllogism. So we've heard before, do I have to do that? Oh, yeah, I do. Sorry, checking my notes. I'm gonna blabbing on without them. So let's look at gross physical things. Do gross physical things have parts? How might we prove it? Take any gross physical thing. We just did it, like my hand. Cover part of it, and there's other parts still showing. If my whole hand existed as a whole hand, independent of its parts, you couldn't cover some of it and have some other of it still there. That's true of any physical thing. Another reasoning would be, if my hand is one thing, then it would all move together. I wouldn't be able to do this. Right? To move one would to move them all. And that's not our experience. It's got parts that function. Then what about going down more and more subtly for our physical things? Shouldn't it be the case that we can get down to a smallest physical particle that makes up my hand? And that if I can find one single smallest particle that then comes together with other single smallest particles, then it's the single smallest particle that is the one thing that my hand depends upon. Then we could still say, well, then it's not true that some one thing really exists, because there's that one smallest building block. And we've heard the argument again and again, the smallest particle that's undivisible, undividable. It used to be atoms. Now I don't know what the name of it is, which is proof right there that atoms were never undividable the way we thought. But let's go to atoms and say, suppose what we're calling an atom is this indivisible thing. If you split it any further, you no longer have the thing that the atom was an atom of. Like an atom of water is the smallest particle that's still water. And you split it any further and you don't have water anymore. If we could say there was such a thing as one smallest particle that makes up water, but that it takes multiple of those smallest particles to come together to make a drop of water that we can perceive, then doesn't it mean there's a teeny little particle here and a teeny little particle here, and they have to touch but not overlap? Because if they overlap, you're back to just having one particle, and you can't ever build a whole drop of water if you've just got one particle and another one. They have to touch but not merge so that you can build them up into a drop of water. And if they touch, then it means our undividable atom has an outside and an inside where they touch. And if they have an outside and an inside, or a this side and a that side, then guess what? They have parts. You may not be able to divide the atom from this side to that side, But in order for the atom to function, it has the parts of its sightedness. So anywhere we go down, looking for more and more subtle physical things that come together to make up a whole, we're proving to ourselves that no whole thing can exist really. No thing can exist as one thing really. Does it exist as one thing? Yes. But not really in the sense of not from its own side, independent of relying on its parts at the level we're talking about. Okay, that was a homework question. So now let's look at mental things. We have mind and mental functions, our basic awareness, and all those mental functions, all the other factors that make us up, plus discriminating, plus feeling, plus awareness of our physical. So we just took the physical out of the picture. Now we're looking at mind and mental functions. Mental things have two kinds of causes: direct cause and indirect or remote causes. The direct cause means the mental thing that happens right before the current moment mental thing. So your visual awareness of me now was directly caused by your visual awareness of me the moment before. And then this moment pushes us into the next this moment. And it was hot on the heels of the moment that was this moment, the moment before. So direct cause. Then my colors, my shapes, all the different information that you're taking to come up with your perception, me. Those are the contributing factors or the remote causes. But remote causes go back earlier and earlier, before the one that comes exactly before. But they're all contributing to this moment of awareness. Then they stream along in what we call moments of time. So the explanation is for this category of changing things that are mental, the mind and the mental functions streaming along according to their direct and remote causes shows us that those mental things have parts. The part that's caused by the remote cause, and the part that's caused by the direct cause, and the part that's experienced right now, and the part that's experienced the next instant. All of those are parts of changing things that are mental. Because they're going along moment by moment, they have parts revealed by the different causes. So every instant of thought is followed by another instant of thought, and they're separated by moments of time. So the parts of the mental things are identified by the lapse of time between them. One part of the thought happens sooner than the next part. If a thought does not have those parts, a first part, a next part, and a next part, etc., there would be no lapsed time between thoughts. And so all thoughts would occur simultaneously, or there would only be one thought. And neither one of those is our experience. So we've shown how physical changing things have parts, both gross and subtle have parts. And we've gotten a glimpse that all mental things have parts in terms of this shifting through time. Now let's go to unchanging things. Can we show that existing things that are unchanging also have parts? So the three classical unchanging things: cessations, empty space, and emptiness. Cessations mean the cessations of mental afflictions and their seeds that come from the path of seeing onward. A cessation means that we are finally free of some mental affliction. Not that it's just not happening right now, but that we don't have the seeds that can ripen into that mental affliction ever again. The seeds that we do have don't have enough power to get over into the threshold. Once we have reached a cessation, we are 100% free, not partly free, not 3/4 free, and then fully free. It's all or nothing. A cessation. Once they're gone, they're gone. Until all of those mental affliction seeds are so damaged they can't ripen, we're not completely free. Once they are, it's 100% gone. It's not like we get to 50% mental affliction of anger gone. We still have it until we don't. So when something comes about 100% or not, that is an existing thing that's unchanging. It isn't permanent. It isn't necessarily forever. An existing, unchanging thing. But as long as it exists, it's 100% complete. Empty space is another one of those things that's 100% or not at all. The place our friend the pen is in is 100% the space the pen is in, wherever the pen is. And it's not like, here's the space it's not in, and that the pen like pours into it little bit by little bit. It's that anywhere the pen is 100% the space that it's in. the space being the absence of its obstruction. And once it's obstructed, the space is still 100% available for the pen to be in it, because if it changed, it would push the pen out. So we would say the space the pen is in is here now. And we might say, well, if you move the pen over here, the space that it was in is still there. And the space is now unoccupied. So you can't call it the space the pen was in. We can remember the pen was here. And when it was here, it was in that space right there. But once the pen moves out of that space, the space is still 100% space. And now the space the pen is in is over here. 100%. That's the important piece here. The space doesn't change whether the pen is in it or not. We can learn to recognize intellectually that wherever there's a physical thing, the space it's in must be there, even though we can't see it directly because it's blocked by the object. And it's a really great tool to grow our ability to perceive an object and know it's our seeds ripening and nothing but, without thinking, oh, it's got to look different or it's got to be different, because we've worked with pen in the space it's in. I can see it and know the other at the same time. We can perceive an object and know its emptiness at the same time. And that goes a long way at helping us respond differently to things. So why are we talking about this? It's the 100% thing, unchangingness of these certain category of existing things. The third thing that's in that category of existing things that are not changing is emptiness, the lack of self-nature of any existing thing, whether it's in the changing things category or the unchanging things category, the lack of their identity in them from them because they depend on their causes, or because they depend on their parts, or because they depend on the kuntak of the person perceiving the shenwang, or depending on the person in the 50-50 school, or depending on the highest way mind seeds projecting it that way, regardless of the level. Emptiness is the lack of the thing existing in it from it in the way that we believe. Is that something that changes? It goes in and out of existence with the object that we are considering the emptiness of. But does the pen's lack of self-existence shrink as the pen goes out of existence? Or is it still 100% as long as the pen is existing? And at the last blink out, the pen's lack of self-existence is gone because there's no pen to lack self-existence anymore. It's 100%. 100% lacking self-existence, or 100% nothing to be lacking self-existence. Emptiness doesn't gradually come into being, reach its peak, and gradually go away. to be a changing thing, gradually come to its peak of existence and gradually decline. But every instant of that gradual increase and change, the object is 100% lacking its nature in it. Whether the thing is the brand new baby, or the middle-aged woman, or the 150-year-old woman, 100% lacking nature in them. Identical. Emptiness of baby, identical in lackness of old lady. So existing things that are unchanging, how is it that they depend upon parts? Because that's the case we're making, is that all existing things, of all existing things, nothing can exist really as one thing or really as many things. And we need to cover all existing things. So how is it that existing things that are unchanging can still depend on their parts if they're an unchanging thing? 100% always. So here's a pen. And here's not a pen, but a phone. And this object has 100% lack of its nature in it, its emptiness. And this phone has its 100% lacking its identity in it from it. So here's an emptiness, and here's an emptiness. And they say, see, emptiness has parts. And when my mind hears that, I think, oh, they mean there's this great big uber emptiness, and here's the phone part of it, and here's the pencil part of it. And that's not correct. But emptiness does have parts in the sense that this part of existence has its emptiness, and this part of existence has its emptiness. And every part of existence has its emptiness. And those emptinesses all depend upon their appearing thing to be empty of. So the appearing thing, the emptiness depends upon its appearing thing. I don't know why they don't describe it like that. The appearing thing is the part that allows emptiness to be. The appearing thing is the part that makes emptiness there, 100%. So existing things that are unchanging still depend upon their parts. In emptiness, it's the part that's empty. It's the thing that's empty. In empty space, it's the up, the down, the this side, the that side, the front, the back. It's the directions of empty space. In cessations, it's the mental affliction that has ceased. There's a anger mental affliction that will be ceased. And there's a doubt one, and there's a jealousy one, and there are all these different emptinesses, cessations that we will reach based on what has been ceased. So existing things that are unchanging still depend on parts, but in a different way that physical things depend on parts, and in a different way than mental things depend on parts. So they all depend on some unique kind of parts, but the fact that they all depend upon parts means that they can't and don't exist as one thing. because one thing means something without parts. And if one thing can't exist really because it depends upon its parts, then multiple one things can't exist really because each of those multiple one things are depending upon their parts. So back to consider the three knowledges. They don't exist really, meaning they don't exist independent of their parts. And we're saying they don't exist independent of their parts as one thing, nor do they exist independent of their parts of many things. So therefore, they don't exist really. They do exist independence upon their parts. Like, why don't they just say that and get it over with? Because we want to learn the sequence of reasoning. Is when we get good at our sequence of reasoning, we can figure that stuff out without somebody having to explain it to us. We can work that all out ourselves and prove to ourselves something that we can't directly perceive, like past and future lives, like the possibility of our Buddhahood, like karmic consequences. All right, let me see if I've covered your homework. So how does that prove emptiness? If we've shown ourselves that nothing can exist really as one thing or many things, that lack of independent existence is their emptiness. We just went through all existing things. None of them can exist independent of some other factor, which tells us how they do exist as dependent upon those other factors. And that by implication says, and they don't exist in any way without those other factors. And that's their emptiness. So to show ourselves that of all existing things, nothing in any of those different categories can exist independent of its parts. That reveals to us that none of those things exist in them, from them, without depending on something else. So that reveals to us their lack of self-nature. Because self-nature means they are them independent of other factors, independent of their parts, independent of their causes, independent of the perception of the being who's experiencing them. And it's like, can you establish as existing something that you cannot experience? No. It could be right in front of you. And we wouldn't be able to establish its existence if we couldn't experience it. Can we experience one whole thing? No. The whole thing that we do experience is based on all these little pieces that our mind comes up with the whole and says, that's the whole. And our ignorant mind includes in that's the whole in it, from it, mistakenly. we can lay on the whole thing, my whole hand. As long as we understand that it's not the hand saying my whole hand, it's our mind saying my whole hand. The difference then being, well, if my whole hand is not coming from my whole hand, it's coming from my mind, does it necessarily have to be this kind of hand? Could it be some other kind of hand? Yes. Could it be a hand that looks like a claw? Yes. Could it be a hand that looks like Rainbow Buddy? Yes. Can I make that happen by choice? Apparently not. I've tried. Not the claw thing, but the Rainbow Buddy. But does it make sense that it could happen if that's how I'm perceiving it? Yeah, because it's only human hand, because that's how I'm perceiving it. So to understand this system of taking something we don't quite understand to be true yet and breaking the components down until we get to some category of divisions that make it clear that if you can or can't find it in this division and can or can't find it in this division, there's no other divisions you need to check at. And then all we do is go looking for the thing in both of these divisions, find that it's not there the way we think. And it's like, oh, that's the emptiness of the thing we're looking at. And by association, that's the emptiness of everything in that category that we just investigated. So consider the three knowledges. They don't exist really because they don't exist really as one thing. And they don't exist really as many things. They are for existence, example, like a reflection, an image in a mirror. Does that make more sense? They don't exist in them, from them, in the category of singular or in the category of multiple, because they exist in dependence upon their parts. Then we can say, okay, then I agree. 3 equals 1. In our original syllogism, consider the three knowledges. They don't exist really as one thing or really as many things, because I understand to exist really means to exist independent of parts, and they don't. So then now we can go on and say, if it's true that they don't exist really as one thing or really as multiple things, is it necessarily true that they don't exist really at all? We could say yes. If 3, then 2. Then let's do the negative necessity. If it's not true that they don't exist really, which means if they do exist really, meaning independent of their parts, if they did, not whether they did, if they did, then would it necessarily mean that they don't exist really as one thing, nor don't exist really as many things? Yeah, we just said, if it were true that they do exist really, then it would have to be true, also true, that they exist really as one thing or as multiple things, because everything in the universe is either single or multiple. So we're not saying, oh, really, they do exist. We're just saying, if you negate number 2, does that automatically negate number 3? We say yes. And that means the 3 relationships hold. And that means that this proof is proof that the 3 knowledges don't exist really. Mostly it means we now understand what really is code word for. They don't exist in them, from them, independent of their parts. So this class says again, do your meditation time on this syllogism and see if it makes more sense. Reword it if you need to. They don't exist really because they have parts. And see how that works it backwards to when we say they don't exist really as one thing. Our mind says, not that they don't exist at all, but they depend upon the parts. They depend upon other stuff, which means they don't come about in them, from them. And that's what we're trying to reach. We think there are these 3 knowledges, either in books telling us about them, or in somebody's mind, and we think they are something that is there, regardless of whether we know about them, have heard about them, see them. And it's just a state of mind that we have that's mistaken. And we want to be able to recognize our mistaken mind. And one of the methods of doing that so beautifully is learn this method of checking our beliefs according to the logic statement. Does what I'm asserting about that boss and the reason I give for my assertion about that boss really hold up when I compare these 3 relationships? All right. That's class 9. Again, Saturday, Geshe Michael said something like, just don't try to understand it all, because it'll make us crazy trying. But just crack your mind open, let the stuff in, let it percolate, try, work with it, but don't beat yourself up if you go to these homeworks and go, oh man, I thought I understood it during class, but now I don't get it at all. Just try. The effort is the important seed planting business at this stage, not the getting it perfectly. So let go of the I need to understand it perfectly, and play with it and chew on it and work with it and explain it to each other. And later on, you'll go, what was so hard about that? Right? It's so clear. Once our seeds shift, right? And no amount of struggling, fighting with ourselves, beating ourselves up is going to help us get to that point. So be nice to yourself. So remember that person we wanted to be able to help. believe it or not, we learned a lot that we will use to help them in that deep end ultimate way. And that's an extraordinary goodness. So please be happy with yourself. And think of this goodness like a beautiful glowing gemstone that you can hold in your hands. Recall your own precious holy guide. See how happy they are with you. Grow your gratitude to them, your reliance upon them. Ask them to please stay close, to continue to guide you and help you. And then offer them this gemstone of goodness. See them accept it and bless it. And then carry it with them right back into your heart. See them there, feel them there. That love, that compassion, that wisdom. It feels so good. We want to keep it forever. And so we know to share it by the power of the goodness that we've just done. May all beings complete the collection of merit and wisdom, and thus gain the two ultimate bodies that merit and wisdom may. So use those 3 long exhales to share this goodness with that one person. To share it with everyone you love. To share it with every being you've ever heard of. See them all filled with happiness, filled with loving kindness. And they're shining it forth to everyone in their world. And may it be so. Okay, thank you so much. You know, I'm starting to look forward to our next classes. And with the way Geshe Michael's schedule and my schedule are, we won't start ACI 3 until early January, so we can have it done before Chinese New Year, which is a long time from now until then to lose momentum. And so what I'm thinking I'd like to do is to offer the death and the death awareness practice module in November, because I can get it done between Medicine Buddha and Lamrim, you know, even with Thanksgiving in the middle. But I'm going to put that out between this class and the other class and see if there's interest. It's just such a packed time of year. Everybody's busy and maybe nobody wants to do anything, but it just feels like October, November, December is too long to go without doing something together. So that's my idea. I'll fine tune it by next week and see what I can offer. Right? So be brave. If you're not interested, tell me, please. Okay. So thank you very much. I'm stopping the recording. Yes, I'm sure.